Dr. Khalid, did I say hello?
Yes, how are you? Good evening. Good evening. Good morning to you at Canada. Yeah. Yeah. It's quite afternoon now, yeah?
Yeah, it's midday.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Rania, should we start?
Yes, please. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, welcome you, everyone. I am Dr. Abdelaziz Zuhri from Morocco, and we have with us Dr. Rania from Qatar. We're going to be moderating this book discussion. It's, as you see, today we have Anne Lopez, who has recently published the book Decolonizing Educational Leadership, and it is hosted by IDRAC Academy. IDRAC is a platform that tries to explore and share multiple ways of knowing, learning, and developing. And last time, the last session was the book discussion of Professor Khalid Arar's book on refugees and leadership for refugees. It was a wonderful session. Today, we hope that it's going to be an awesome session because the topic is very, very interesting. So some bookkeeping before we start. The webinar is being recorded and shared online on Facebook. This session will last for 1 hour and a half. Please share your name, affiliation, and country in the Zoom chat, and you can leave comments or questions in the Zoom chat. And remember to mute yourself if someone else is speaking. Thank you very much. And the outline of this session is as follows. We will start with a presentation of the book by Professor Anne Lopez. Then we're going to proceed into a conversation with the author, led by Rania and me. And then we're going to have a panel discussion. We have some very well-known scholars today with us in the issue of leadership and decolonization or decolonizing praxis. Well, Professor Khalid Arar, Professor Singh, and Professor Njorog Mungai. And the last part of the session will be a question and answer session where the participants, the participants are going to engage with the panelists and with Professor Anne Lopez in a conversation on the same issue. We welcome you all on board. We hope that you're going to enjoy this trip with us. Rania, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Abdulaziz, and thank you everyone for joining us in this amazing, lovely discussion about this very interesting book. Thank you, Dr. Anne, for introducing this. While reading it, you're just voicing our own experience and our own thoughts. Dr. Anne is well known for her work in different institutions and different organizations. Currently, she's working as a professor of education leadership and policy at Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. She's also leading the director of the Center for Leadership and Diversity. She's a chief editor and chief for the Journal of School Leadership. She has lots of contribution with national associations and World Council for Equity and Diversity in Education. She will definitely tell us about her journey during her presentation about the book. Personally, when I was reading, within the chapters, each one of them is fascinating and taking us into a lovely journey. But I will tell you about one of my favorites when you talked about decolonizing the mind, the process of unlearning and relearning. So be prepared, stay tuned for the questions and the discussion that we will have with you. And the microphone is yours, Dr. Anne.
Thank you so much. Thank you all very much. And thanks to all the folks who've taken some time to join us today. I have a little bit of a PowerPoint to share, not much. So if you could allow me to do that, I would appreciate that. And while that is coming on, I'm going to first of all, have a little bit of a land acknowledgement because I'm coming to you from a place called Caledon, just outside of Toronto. Ontario. And so it's important for us. And so I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I live and I occupy and I'm coming to you from today, as we gather in the region of Peel, is part of the treaty lands of the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And so I am grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, give respect to the first inhabitants. And so that's very important for me to do. So I'm just going to share a little bit of my slide with
You
you.
can share, Anne. Go ahead.
I can share. Okay. Thank you. So can everyone see that?
Not
So
till
first,
now.
can you see my slides?
Not yet, but I think not yet. But if you have
Okay.
fully shared, I think
Not
it will
yet.
take some time, maybe.
Okay, let me go here, share screen. When I click on share screen, it says the host has disabled the participant screen sharing. So I think you're going to have to make me co-host or something.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Can you try again? No?
Okay, now it's perfect.
Great.
Thank you.
Great.
Wonderful.
Yes.
And
we're
there
seeing
we
it.
go. Can you see now? Perfect. So first of all,
Yes,
I'd like to
perfect.
thank everyone for coming up. When people show up to hear what you want to say, it's an honor. So the first thing I'd like to say before I thank EDRAC is that I bring my authentic self to you today. So I'm wearing a gele in honor of my ancestors from West Africa. I'm also wearing a kente cloth, and in that has the colors of the Jamaican flag, which is black, green, and gold. So I am bringing myself to you, and I know I'm surrounded by the spirit of my ancestors, because it's on their shoulders on which I rest every day, all the time. When I do good, when I need a little touch on the shoulder to refocus, they're there. So it's so important for me to share that with you. But I'd like to thank EDRAC Academy for sort of even seeing anything valuable in anything that I write and to share. So that's very important. So thank you all very much, Dr. Zori, Dr. Rania, and all the folks there as well. So thank you. And I see some of my amazing students, so thank you as well. And I have to thank my colleagues. You know, I've been in education now close to 30 years. And one of the things I maintain is that we never do this work by ourselves. We do this in collaboration with others. And not just in our immediate geographical context, but outside of our geographical context. And I often say to people when they say to me, so you go to Kenya? And I say, when I go to Kenya, or I go to Ghana, or I go to Morocco, or any place I go, I do not go with a Western lens of judging. I go to make relationships. I go to find my people, because they are everywhere, everywhere. So I just want to thank Professor Khalid, Professor Singh, Professor Mungai, and again, Professor Ranid, for just taking time for being here. I so appreciate that. And so before I sort of get into sort of some of the epistemologies and some of that kind of thinking behind decolonizing education and leadership, I think it's so important to share my inspiration, what brought me to this point. And some of you might have noticed on Twitter, I just had a birthday on Monday, and I am truly older and wiser. And so it's a thank you. Yes, I am older and wiser, and I have outlived my mother and my father. So every step I make is a blessing. And so it's so important for everyone who's listening to understand where the inspiration comes from, because writing is not an academic exercise. I can't write because of an academic. I have to write with my heart and soul. I have to bring myself. So, you know, the inspiration for this book came out of my own positionality, who I am. It came out of research that I have done in Jamaica, the GTA, in Kenya with school leaders. And it also comes out of my desire, my ongoing desire for change in education and schooling. And I'm going to share a little bit about my positionality, but let me give you a quick example of that, where that desire comes from for schooling, in change in education and schooling. I am a Grammy, and I love being a Grammy. My granddaughters are my life. That's my number one job. And just this morning, they're doing online schooling, and one is writing, they're twins, writing on racism in education. She comes to me, she says, Grammy, I have to make a talk about racism in education. And I said, okay, do you understand what the term means? And said, well, we'll have to research that. And then she did some Googling, and I said, of course, you also have to look at different kinds of racism, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous, but they're 12, so I'm sort of doing a pedagogical thing for 12-year-old. And then I said to her, so honey, you tell me how you experience racism in schools. She says, oh, Grammy, when they yell at me, when I am when I am accused of doing things that I never do. And I say, why do you feel that is racism? And she says, because we're Black, and I feel that's how sometimes the Black kids get treated. So we don't need a whole lot of research to tell us what our students already know and what they're telling us every day. So quickly, I'm going to take 2 minutes just to share a little bit about my positionality, and you would have seen it in the book. So I'm not going to read all of it, but suffice to say, some of you would have known that I was born and raised in Jamaica, impacted by my grandmother. And I really want to draw on those stories that, you know, because we often talk a lot and we use a lot of critical race theory, for those of us who do qualitative research and critical epistemologies and so on, and the whole power of storytelling, which really formed an inspiration in this book. And so here on my slide, there's a map of Jamaica for those of you who might not have ever sort of been to Jamaica. But there are other people on this slide that I think it's important for me to bring to those who are listening, that really these folks have been part of my journey. They have been part of my learning. Those are the stories that really made me begin to think about who I am in this world and what it is I want my life and my work to be. On your left is Paul Bogle, and he was an enslaved person in Jamaica who fought for his freedom. Then beside him, and he's one of our national heroes. Then there is Sam Sharp, another one of the enslaved who fought the rebellions. So history, we're in Black History Month, and Black history is so important for this history. And Nanny of the Maroons. We do not have time today to talk about the Maroons because they also have treaty relationships with the United Kingdom and operate much in the same way as Indigenous people of Jamaica. A lot of people don't know that. There's so much of the history to know. And some things that people do not know, that before the British colonizers came to Jamaica, the Spaniards were there. That's how my last name ended up to be Lopez, because my ex-husband was that. And of course, what a lot of folks don't know is in Jamaica, we had indigenous people, the Taino, the Arawaks. Folks don't know Jamaica was called Examaica, named by the indigenous people. It's not just a tourist destination without a history. So that is so very, very important. So I just wanted to share a little bit about that. And the last piece about my positionality that I wanted to share, that I've written in the book, is really how, to be honest with you, when I went to university, when I was in high school, I thought emancipation was really freeing the enslaved. I really, really believed it to my core. Then I had a history teacher who said, no, emancipation wasn't anything like what you're imagining, free slaves running around, free enslaved owning. No, it was a mitigated form of slavery. My history teacher. So I'm trying to share the power of education and what we can do with that. And then I went to the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, where my eyes were just opened, really, really opened, and where I begin to realize I don't have to squeeze my nose for it to be straight. I don't have to uh, uh, straighten my hair for to enjoy hair. It was almost as coming into being, shedding the colonial structures of who I am as a person. So that's part of the inspiration and where this whole idea of this ongoing work of decolonization comes from. So the lesson I quickly want to pivot to is now the research. And so, as I've mentioned, I have conducted as a school leader, and everyone knows I came into academia from having a career in teaching and administration. So I'm really been in schools and seeing really what happens in those spaces. And when I was doing my research and looking at the similarities that's emerging from the data as to the experiences that school leaders are sharing and my observations of the context and where there are divergences, one of the connecting things about all of the spaces that dawned on us was this whole idea of the persistence, not of colonial people standing, holding, but of coloniality and the ways in which the remnants of colonization still persists in the structures of society and in particular education and coloniality. And I'm not, because of, we are going to take it up in the conversations, but that emerged and had me thinking in ed leadership, we have not really foregrounded this knowledge. We have not really sort of unpacked it, deconstructed it to see, which is the purpose of this book, to see how that might inform how we think about educational leadership, the theorizing of it and the practice, and where are the synergies, where are the convergences with other theories that we've been using, culturally responsive, social justice, and anti-racist, and so on. And if you get an opportunity, read the work of Keanu. He's a scholar from South America, I believe it's Peru, amazing work on coloniality. But suffice to say, as I move on, that it's what we're talking about here. Before we can get to decolonization and begin that act, that process, we must understand ways in which coloniality continues to be perpetuated through knowledge and power, what Kiana calls coloniality of power and coloniality of knowledge. And so, as I've said before, how this persists and really resides in day-to-day realities of education and schooling through acts of racial discrimination. Dutrow and colleague talks about that. And really, if you think of the structures, the way we think about teaching and learning and leading, assessment, how we do all of those things, what have we shed? What are we bringing on in some of those ways that we engage in schools? And so I wanted to then present this graphic as a way of capturing that, as a way of capturing the decolonizing process. That is not an act. I think it's Tucken Yang says it's not a metaphor. It's not something that we attach to everything. It's actually work. It's a process. And I really, if you ever get an opportunity, read the work of Professor Abdi. He's out at the University of British Columbia. Amazing scholar, writes a lot about decolonizing processes and the philosophies. I draw a lot on his work and really how it is about the reclaiming of geographies and spaces of knowledge and knowing. That's what really resonates for me. And so as a framework, as a tool, and if we have practitioners who want to pick this up or folks in university, I believe, and I'm positing here, that this process starts with understanding coloniality, getting into sort of beginning to understand decolonizing as a process, creating kind of new epistemologies, but also being informed by our own ontology. So that is so very, very important. And I have the arrows going because it's iterative, it's generative, it's not intended to be static. And so I think it's Professor Rania that says she really wants to have more conversations around decolonizing the mind. And, Professor Rania, because, I don't know how to do a book talk, to be honest with you. I just know how to engage in conversations with people and dialogue. And really, for me, I spent a lot of time thinking about myself, thinking about my own thinking. And particularly when I was a school teacher, and particularly when I was an administrator. And then when I got into university, what am I being complicit in and why? What am I being silenced about and why? What is driving the fear? What am I afraid of? What about this space that I so value that I'm going to silence myself and silence others? So I really had to spend a lot of time thinking about my own self and my own journey. And that's the decolonizing of the mind. And I have many stories to share about that in terms of my own thinking, in terms of my own learning, in terms of my own unlearning. So in the book, I shared a very simple framework in terms of beginning to name. And so in this initial part, I know this is only 10 minutes. Give me the 1 minute signal, Dr. Zori. We want to keep on time.
3 minutes.
Oh, okay, great. You know, I'm a Jamaican and a storyteller. We could be here all day. But do not be afraid. Let this be a conversation because we'll have lots of time to share questions. And so, as I've said before, now when I put pen to paper to write, I really want those who are in non-uni spaces to be able to use it, and those in university spaces to also be able to use it. I know, for example, Professor Arar at Texas State works a lot with emerging principals and those who are going maybe to be superintendents and so on. We want, those of us who are doing this critical work, want those folks to begin to think, how am I going to engage in this work? How am I going to engage? How am I going to make those decisions? How am I going to build those relationships? What do I need to learn and unlearn? And so within that framework, the theoretical framework, as you can see in the book, I draw a lot on anti-colonial theorizing and post-colonial theorizing. Those two are not necessarily the same thing, but they inform each other, and that's important. I drew a lot on the work of indigenous scholars such as Baptiste here in Canada, and she did give me, I have it to say, I'm so excited, an endorsement for the book along with Professor Arar and Professor Abdi also. And so, you know, all of the indigenous scholars who have done that work. And I also want to posit in this space the work of African indigenous scholars, because indigeneity belongs to everyone. It is that connection to where we come from. It's that connection to all of us, to all of our spiritual homelands, wherever that may be, to wherever we have that connection, to the work of George Day here at OISI, the work of Professor Joki Wayne, my dear friend. She was the one that took me first to Kenya, to the continent of Africa. When I got off the plane, I shed tears. I could not believe I was there. And then I went to a session and there were folks from South Africa and Ghana and Morocco. And we had a session and they looked at me and said, "Welcome home." Oh my goodness gracious. It was such an amazing feeling of connection to my ancestors, to my ancestral, because I'm here because they survived. We know
Dr.
that.
Anne,
1
Dr.
minute.
Anne, yep, you're a storyteller and you're giving us this great example of this.
Okay, so
You have
I'm done
mentioned it
now.
within your
I'll
book.
wrap up. Yes, I'll wrap up. So quickly, I have just a few slides left. One, and it's really around one of the takeaways and what can we do with this work? And we can talk about that. Is this whole idea of what I call restoring capacity, some ways to do that. And of course, so important to recenter and have space for renewal as we do this work, and really a call to action. And there it is. I got it in 10 minutes. Okay, I'll stop sharing now. Different ways to say thank you.
And really, thank you. What I would like, before we start our questions for you and see the attendees or the participants' questions also, I highly, highly encourage you to record the stories that you would like to share related to each chapter of them, because we can hear your voice within every single word. You know, it's not only introducing kind of data or evidence, but it's a life, it's a journey that we are all. And during the book, I was just telling Abdulaziz before we started, I was keen to read something similar about Arab countries, because we have lots of things to share about. So Abdulaziz, do you like to start with your question, or shall I shoot?
Go ahead. Don't shoot, but go ahead.
See, we're talking about colonization and decolonization.
Well,
And
we don't want to start a war here, you know.
Education is the most important weapon, you know, like we're talking about. Anyway.
I agree. Go ahead.
I know that Dr. Anne, you worked as a former teacher, and within your work in secondary schools, you also mentioned within the chapters how you define school leadership. And it's not, it's one aspect of education leadership. You also mentioned that it's formal and informal. I was hoping to see more emphasis on student leadership, especially that you focused on how to provide a space for students and to provide them with this kind of supportive environment. But from my own experience also, I think teachers, because they are mediating and they're helping this kind of democratic dialogue, as you see, as you say, within the
Dr. Rania, we'd like to. Are you still here?
I'm back. So that was one of the most important things I wanted to highlight and hear your input, Dr.
Rania,
Anne,
I
about
see
this.
that we lost you at a moment. We didn't hear everything you said.
I think the last thing,
Yeah.
I was talking about school leadership. You mentioned that it's formal and informal. You mentioned also the importance of providing kind of space for students. And also, we might need to focus on teachers because they mediate and they moderate this for. Could
I'm
you
sorry,
close
I
your mics,
muted
please?
you because I
Thank you.
wanted to mute everyone.
Because also sometimes.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Go on. You're muted. You're muted.
This is part of school leadership because you already mentioned that it's formal and informal. And also one of the things related to school leadership, as you mentioned, within the teacher's role within teaching and learning and the curriculum, it's part of instructional leadership. So just to have your input regarding this, please.
And you're quite right. So first of all, yes, and in much of the work I do around educational leadership and school leadership, and even all of the research and the writings, I truly try to say it's really drawing on Sir Giovanni's idea and notion that everyone is a leader and everyone has leadership capacity. And one of the things I think we need to decolonize is even how we think of leadership and who can lead. And so that's the reason I take great pains of making distinctions between those who are given an administrative role called a leader and those who really find agency even without an administrative role. We see those people every day in schools, no matter where you go in the world. I didn't get to listen to the last version of African Voices Dialogue, but the first one, all of these leaders from Kenya, Ghana, in their spaces who are really making a difference in the lives of students without having a formal position. So that's kind of where that is coming from. And really, Professor Reiner, is that invitation, is really that invitation to agency. And particularly also around students. And you could have done more in the book, and maybe I'll take all of these ideas and write a second volume to this around picking up on things that I could have expanded on more. The notion of student leadership, which is really now, as we can see in this moment that we're in, young people are driving a lot of the change, and they're taking a lot of the initiatives. Right here in Ontario, quickly, we have a school board where a student led actions at the trustee level, a student trustee, to really fight for changes within that school board. And so, yes, it's so one of the things, and I have a chapter that's coming out in another book that I edited called Teacher Activism in Teacher Leadership, and really what might that look like. So absolutely, it's an invitation to say leadership doesn't belong to anyone, and it doesn't belong to just those who are in formal roles. But having said that quickly, I believe, and I want to share and want to hear people's ideas. When we are, however, given the formal roles of leadership, what do you do with it? What decisions do you make?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And how do you either stifle or support those who are in non-formal roles? So that's kind of how I'm thinking about
that. And that will take us to your to restoring capacity. Abdulaziz, your question.
Yeah. So first, I would just, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. I would just maybe refer to a quote said by an Arab scholar, a Palestinian author, who has written a lot about post-colonialism and colonialism, who is Edward Said, who said we cannot fight for our rights and our history as well as future until we are armed. I'm going to bring weapons again, until we are armed with weapons of criticism and dedicated consciousness. So it all starts with us. I understand this. The question is, Dr. Anne Lopez, how can we first, this is my first question, how can we convince people, and there are many people who have been colonized or were colonized, who think that the colonizer brought civilization, that the colonizer brought education, that the colonizer changed their world to the better. There are still many who think that if the colonizers stay longer, the colonizers stay longer in their countries, or in our countries, including my country, we would have better places and better minds. How can we convince these people that decolonization is worthwhile?
So first of all, thank you for asking that question, because that is something that we face all the time in many spaces. And that was actually the thinking behind that chapter on decolonizing the mind. And I think it's Fanon and others who talked about ways in which the colonizers almost made the colonized take on their way of thinking. That was the first part. And the second part of what the colonizers did was to make us not believe, or make the folks that are colonizing our ancestors not believe in their own selves, not believe in their own abilities, not believe in their own knowledge. And remember, colonization was a process of control. It was not just a process of control of land. It was a process of control of mind. That's how you subjugate folks. You subjugate folks through their mind. We see it even today. We had a whole group of people in the United States not believing an election was fair, so they decided to have an insurrection based on something that they believed. So to your question, which I think is a salient point here, how do we convince people? I think how I look at this now, Dr. Zori, is agency, is really trying to create the change in the spaces where we're in, and really to engage. And that is what this book is about. Because yes, there are many Black folks, there are many racialized people. We have many of them in Jamaica who believe that, if we had British rule, we'd be better off, and so on. And it is really to help folks to understand ways in which they need to begin to think about what they bring to the table, and to understand that a control and subjugation of land or mind is not to your benefit. And also something we don't talk about enough is the economic benefit that came out of colonization, that, it was all of the labor and so on. So I don't know, Dr. Zori, if I would say it is convincing as it is as much as engaging people in learning and unlearning, because I had to do it myself. I had to begin to unlearn what I had learned in the colonial education. I had to begin to, let me give an example, to begin to think that people from the African continent made a contribution to science and history and math and so on. So I don't know if I would say it's convincing as much as it is an ongoing process. And it's a struggle. It's an ongoing struggle. It's ongoing work. Something that comes to mind as well, when we think of the education systems, there are many people in many colonized countries who would tell you that they prefer the British system of education, that it brought all of these things and so on. And so it is we as scholars have a duty and a responsibility to use our voice to posit into space, to bring value and knowledge to indigenous and to our knowledge to those who are colonized. So it's an ongoing process. And that's a great question that, you'll get in schools, in universities and so on.
Thank you so much. Rania?
Yeah, it's really interesting and amazing. Yes, you can hear me. I'm very happy that the participants are sharing ideas and sharing questions. We will leave the questions till the end after the panel discussion. But we also would like to encourage you to share kind of ideas, because some of them are asking, what can we do? Now we need to hear your voices from this discussion, what every one of us can do. And I really liked when you mentioned about reading and the importance of training. It's not only within a workshop. Sometimes those kind of short-term workshops give us a false or a fake understanding of building capacity or knowledge, but we need to link it to reflecting, and we need to make sure that we're walking the talk and we're customizing it according to our own needs. I know that there are lots of ideas, so let's hear also from our panelists, Abdulaziz, to see what brilliant ideas that also they can share with us during those kind of examples. And
So please go ahead, Rania, and introduce the three panelists, if you don't mind. Rania?
I'm sorry, I'm not so sure about the connection. Did you hear me, Abdulaziz?
Yes, I did. Rania, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I said, would you please introduce the panelists?
Sure. We have today with us Professor Khalid Arar, and we are pleased that last session was about his book, and today he's contributing with us and sharing his knowledge, expertise, voicing the experiences. He's an associate professor of education leadership and policy within Texas State University. He's also associate editor of International Journal of Leadership in Education. He worked in schools before as school principal, teacher, and he has a diversity background. He's focusing on equity, diversity, and he has lots of insights, like what we have heard from him last time about refugees education. And today we're talking about different lens of decolonization. We also have Abdulaziz. Do you like to?
Go ahead.
Okay. We also have Professor Herveen with us, Head of Quality Assurance Accreditation at Zayed University, United Arab Emirates. She's Assistant Professor at College of Education. Also, she's focusing on equity in hiring, retention, promotion, organizational change, and we're keen to hear about her journey within leading curriculum development teams and how to develop programs. Welcome on board also Professor Herveen. We have also Dr. Mogai. I hope that I'm pronouncing the names correctly, with more than 19 years of professional teaching experience and amazing background of teaching and curriculum experience, also within his work with quality management systems, leading, editing National Quality Institute of Kenya, or the Kenya Bureau of Standards. Welcome aboard our amazing scholars. And starting with the first question with you, Abdulaziz.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rania. And I would like to thank the three panelists for their participation and their willingness to facilitate this conversation, and to mention that they were invited by IDRAC, but they were also invited by Professor Anne Lopez, who says that all of these three panelists have somehow contributed to the book. Yes. So thank you so much for being here. And it's a pleasure to have you. Maybe the first question that I might address to you is, what is your impression of the book first? And what is your impression and your overall thinking about this issue of decolonizing educational leadership? And you are free to, anyone is free to start, maybe Dr. Khalid.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. And I want to start with congratulating Anne Lopez for this amazing and great contribution. And for us, each book, especially that fits with our advocacy, is a new birth for us. So thank you, Anne. And I have the privilege to read the first draft of the book and to write faithfully and graciously it is endorsement. So to speak about the book, and I can see Ira's book, which is here. I want to frame it on Anne Lopez. She is not hiding. She is telling her story. And I mentioned Ira's name while he posed the question of, what is your story? And she starts from her story. So the self is there, the positionality is there, the identity is there, and the ontology is there. And it is not enough. It is not enough. She moved from her story towards understanding colonization, understanding in framing system, and yet come with her gift to the world. So we have her worldview, her epistemology, her paradigm, and then her gift. And we have here a gift. Once again, as Ira argued, and as another Icelander scholar, Miguel, argued, she named her gift, and it's about decolonizing education. So it is not rethinking decolonization, it's going beyond that, putting the stage of deconstructing this in framing within different empirical and empires entities, while education is one of these imperial systems. And of course, she tries to frame the agency within this. So I think as a Palestinian, I found myself very fit in terms of viewing my worldview as someone who belongs to a nation that has been demolished and cleaned or erased. So I was framed as of part of the otherness, as Edward Said and Zeus Leonardo frame it. So within this, I do have a gift. I do have a gift of reconstructing this reality and an advocacy of trying to build a new reality of recognition, of living together, recognizing otherness, and seeing and envision otherness as a part of wealth. So this book is about anti-racism. It is about resisting. It's about pushing the imperial system. And I think I very connect to this book, as I am living in a vivid coloniality, which unrecognize my existence. So thank you, Anne, and we will continue and elaborate different aspects of the book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that so much.
Hervin, Mongai, would you like to add anything about your impressions? But we will restrict you with the time this time.
Not a problem. I will echo Dr. Khalid's sentiment. And I also wanted to say and build upon what he was saying. I'm born and raised in Toronto, and as a South Asian person, as a brown person, from a very young age, we have been taught or told or role modeled in front of us to voluntarily give things away. Right? So we've been voluntarily giving away our language, our ways of being, our heritage, our religion, all of these core assets. And when I was reading Dr. Ann's contribution, it was as if she was saying, stop giving away all of these core assets and go back to who you are. I could hear her saying, go to your ancestors, go to your assets and do not give them up. Hold on and hold strong, because that is the real tool in dismantling white supremacy. And once you anchor yourself in that space and know who you are, you'll be able to know what you're fighting for. And it was a gift in the sense, I want to use the term that Dr. Khalid just said around a gift. 10 years ago, when I was going through the PhD program, to have any sort of readings that actually coupled the word decolonizing, a decolonizing framework in educational leadership was absolutely unheard of. And so for me, this was a book of coming home, because I was able to look at this book and look at the framework around educational leadership. And I was able now to name. She allowed me and gave me frameworks and tools to name that I could carry with me into my next meetings, etc. And looking at mapping how educational institutions can operate. So I will stop there, and I know we have other questions to go forward, but I absolutely think this is an important contribution, and I will be using it in my master and PhD classes moving forward.
All right. Thank you very much. I also enjoined my previous panelist in congratulating Professor Ann Lopez, my big sister, who has done a great job. My first impression about the book is that it's a bridge between advocacy and agency. It brings out very well. Most of us will call out on colonialism, and that for me is more about advocacy. And her book, just from the first chapter about positionality, agency comes in. You're not just critiquing colonialism and leaving it at that. The book shows us how, but first for acknowledging ourselves, who we are, is very important. And for me, if I would sum up, because of time, I would just say that decolonization will remain enigmatic, confusing to all of us, if colonialism still remains obscure and clear and vague. And I resonated so well in the decolonization education praxis. And the book, the way Professor Lopez writes, is she doesn't just leave just unpacking the colonialism. She calls us into action in terms of agency and gives us the tools. And for me, if you'll allow me just to say that there is a shift in generations, like if you talk about Paul Bogle, they would understand colonialism, but our current generation, because if you don't experience colonialism and you just read stories that are not our stories, you may not necessarily even come into action with regards to decolonization. But if all of us, we start telling our stories about positionality, would kind of make it bear to even the current young generation who, like in Africa, they may not necessarily have lived the colonialism. So they see colonialism as abstract. So even when you talk about decolonizing the mind, decolonization in education, in the African context, those who have not lived through or they've never experienced colonialism, it is hard. But if we start sharing those stories of positionalism, then the agency comes in, and then it will be easier to call out colonialism and put into action what is referred to as a subjectivity location, as if you read Nilon and Giroux in the book Theory Toolbox, they say that you need to call out, first of all, locate the subjectivity, that is, locate where colonialism is happening now in terms of neo-colonialism and attack. And but for me, I think my takeaway mostly was on how to accept my positionality and put it out there as a tool for praxis. Thank you. Because of time, I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very important, especially that I'm quoting here, Dr. Anne, page 7, that you're focusing or decolonization helps us to determine one's role, responsibilities, and duties in engaging in respectful relationships that do not replicate power and control dynamics, confront fears, assumptions, and false realities. Especially when we're talking about borrowing systems from different countries, sometimes we think that this is for education reform, but we don't, reflect on those kind of practices, and we don't see the impact, how it's also affecting our own identities and our own cultures. So that would lead us to the second question, Abdulaziz.
We certainly have thought of a number of questions, but as the conversation unfolds, and with the importance of such an issue, it's not an issue you can cover in a book that in 100 pages. It's not an issue that you can cover in 1 hour and a half. It is a hugely important issue, and there is too much to talk about. And the book itself does not have, there is no redundancy in the book. And as I was reading and taking notes, I wanted to take notes of everything. I kind of felt the whole book is notes, and you can build things from it. But as I am listening to all of you, there are questions that pop up in my mind. I'm sorry. Yes, because there are many different types of, there are different shades of coloniality, different shades of disruption, different shades of engagement. Yes, and maybe the question. Look, Rania, you have mentioned fears from the book, the fear, but I think that there is also a comfort zone here. Yes, so there are costs and benefits in engaging in this reflective discourse and the reflective process of decolonizing the mind and disrupting this colonization. Yes. So, in your opinions, Professor Khalid and Professor Hervin and Professor Mungai, what are the costs and benefits, and how can people weigh the benefits and tilt towards the benefits instead of the costs, instead of focusing on this comfort zone? That's a question that I didn't, it was not scheduled, but it's a question that's popped up in my mind, a question that anyone would ask. So we are already in a comfort zone. We are happy the way we are, between brackets. So how can we, it's a disruption of our own way of thinking. So how can we disrupt all that?
So I'll jump in here, because when you're talking about disruption of your own thinking, we need to also talk about what are the implications of that disruption when it comes to economic reward. And so what I'm hearing you say very clearly is, what do we do and when do we choose and how do we maneuver within an organization that is aspiring to white supremacy or to colonial notions, et cetera, as detailed in Dr. Ann's book. And the question is, well, there are a few things that have to happen in parallel, because she's asking us to decolonize our minds, our spirits, and call ourselves home. But at the same time, we're working within the parameters of a very white supremacist, let's call it as it is, a very racist system. So here's the thing. We need to know when to navigate. We need to know when to negotiate. And then we need to know when to negate. And she calls on us in her framework when she's talking about restoring capacity. That piece is so important. And I find this happening over and over again. And in her book, she talks about mental colonization. She's referring to Fanon's work. And then she goes in to talk about how this mental colonization leads into a perception of cultural inferiority. And that's what happened when the teachers are telling my parents, oh, don't speak Punjabi at home. Hervine's not learning English. It was overnight. They stopped speaking Punjabi. I lost the language and didn't pick it up until I was 19 years, at the age of 19. And then she talks about this as a system system of racialized oppression. But really what we need to talk about is, well, we got economic rewards and promotion on one side, career climbing because people need to eat. And at the same time, I'm committed to dismantling the system. So how do I do this? And so I think it's what are our spheres of influence and how we can do this within our own respective spaces. There was no way in my mind as a child ever, if you asked me 3 years ago or 4 years ago, Hermine, you're going to be head of quality assurance, I would have said, there's no way I'm going to do anything to do with quality assurance. Because what is the definition of quality? What am I assuring? And when you look at quality assurance frameworks, they don't even look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, let alone anti-racism, decolonization, and anti-colonization. So here's the whole framework where I'm sitting, and I'm trying to figure out, well, what do I do? So in those positions, and I know that there was this talk, this is referring back to what Rania was asking, well, how do you bring these questions forward? So my context is in Dubai, and I at one point was running 17 different campuses, and now I'm overseeing, working with federal institutions. And I pose the question, as they're bringing in international accreditation bodies, they're bringing in international seals of approval on our academic programs and university institutionalization of policies and practices, etc. I pose the question, very innocently, not innocently, but pose the question. What does it mean to be an Emirati? What does it mean to be an Arab? What does that mean? Because I can bring in all these high-performing quality assurance frameworks, but until you define to me what it is that you actually want to retain from your heritage, and what's the vital importance, and then tie those threads all the way through the curriculum, I can't serve you. And so once I pose that question, all of a sudden everyone sits back and says, if we adopt all of these frameworks, where are we? Where is our voice? So I'll stop there because I'm sure the other panelists want to come in. But I think these are the sort of questions that when we're in positions of power that we can raise, and it's the way in which we raise these questions to get other people thinking, because we might be diehard fans and connected to this work, but others may not be. So how do we get these perspectives in?
Okay, thank you. I want to align to Heaven and Mongai while coming back to the book. So Anne is trying to reflect on inframing and the way inframing colonize our practices, and instead of just describing this inframing and critiquing the way the system inframes coloniality, she tries genealogically, as Michel Foucault said it, to re-examine systems of power and oppression. And of course, pose her positionality as Jamaican and also as Black woman raised in a former British colony. So there is a cross-sectionality here of both color, power, and resistance. So this is, and the book embraces here the colorness, the brownness, and of course it is grounded within her experience. So yet there is a shift from anti-racism, anti-colonialism to proposing different frames, different sets for resisting coloniality. And she poses alternatives that grounded on community engagement and in community building and rebuilding. So there is here an understanding, a deconstruct, and a reconstruct of reality while grounded with the self and the other and community. And and she fully addresses the way that educators in general and educational leaders in particular can name their gift and can let's say, set their advocacy and set the tone for rebuilding a multicultural reality. So this is how I see the book, as both of like intellectual exercise while fully grounded and integrated with activism and with building new narrative of educational leaders. So, yeah.
Thank you, Professor
Thank
Khalid.
you, Doctor.
Yeah,
Morgan,
yeah,
you have a quick comment?
yeah, just a quick comment. Professor Zori just asked about what is the cost, and I would say colonialism is more costlier. If you don't handle colonialism, then if we just remain at the point of advocacy, domination still will continue. We'll not have that space that we need to liberate ourselves. And I think over the years, we've seen where agency has taken place. Talk about Paul Bogle, talk about Martin Luther King. Those are, they epitomized the colonization of the mind, the colonization, and look at where we are now. How I wish that we would have more of agency than advocacy, and here we are. The cost is that we have the benefits in the colonization. So the cost of handling and calling out on colonialism is the benefit of decolonization, where we get to be ourselves, and we fight for that space by all means. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And Dr. Ann had also mentioned within the book, it's not only about the mind, but it's also about the spirit. So
Sure.
the soil. So when we're talking about the cost, it doesn't come only with the financial aspect. It comes also with the humans, that it might be killing their ideas, killing their souls, killing their, kind of practices. So it's really inspiring. Thank you all. And that would take us to the need of globalization and the political literacy that our school leaders and education leaders need to put into consideration within their preparation programs, within their activities. Abdulaziz?
Yes. Well, just the implications of such a book, and not just the book, because I always say that book discussions like these are not just about the book itself. The book is more than a book. So it opens, it triggers thinking about a very, very big issue that we are all concerned with. And we, as Professor Ann Lopez says in her book, we need to engage in different types of actions and thinking and reflection. And part of the reflection that we need to deal with, of course, is and related to some of the questions that were mentioned. What are the implications for practitioners? What are the implications that this book brings to practitioners, including teachers, including leaders, including students, including everyone, by the way, policymakers? Because when you think of it, the book is about educational leadership, but those leaders that Professor Ann is talking about are the product of an education system itself. So we start with decolonizing education itself, and then we move to decolonizing leadership. So what are the implications, in your opinion? Very briefly, please, in order to move to the Q&A session with our participants.
So I'll jump in very fast and say the implications. The implications for me, they were evident. They are evident in the book, in the text, and they've come alive even in the speech, and even with my colleagues. You can see, first of all, is acknowledging the potentials that we have. Those of us who have suffered or who have undergone colonialization, mostly you'll find that we just a quick one. There is a concept the late Professor Ali Mazrui brought about modernization and westernization. There is a tendency to go for the Western and that part of it is still colonialization, what we call ukoloni mamboleo in Kiswahili, where we, and this one I was taught by Professor Lopez in our various interactions, citing our own scholars, that's praxis in terms of decolonization. With all due respect, we'll say that what is the academic threshold, even in citation in our universities? Do we have to cite? Do we have to push our students to make citations from the West? Yet we have the same the same advocacy, the same skills, the same agency, or the caliber of scholars from let's say in Africa. We look down upon ourselves, even in the academia. So one of the implications of decolonization is even the structuring of the dissertations and advocacy, that even those who are doing masters and PhD, can we have the positionality as a chapter within the dissertations? And you'll find that in most of the academia, probably in Africa, I've seen people being told to remove this qualitative aspect. What is this positionality that you're talking about? So one of the implications is taking cognizance of the potentials that are already there, be it skills, and reinventing and fighting for the space of the indigenous science, the indigenous forms of knowledge. And how can they come about if we don't allow that aspect of positionality? So because of time, I'll just say that for us is to start living it right away from the academia, and start by citing our own scholars who are that would epitomize decolonization in the true sense in the academia. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Ready to
okay?
Yes, go
Okay,
ahead.
yes, all right. So I'm just going to build upon what Dr. Mungai was saying. In her book, in Dr. Ann's book, she talks about decolonizing as working away from everyday drudgery and bringing joy, or moving towards joy. And this is a part that I still am trying to embrace as I move forward, to look at this work as being a space of joy, of empowerment. And that whole model that she presents is really important on looking at how do we restore capacity. And she talks about convergences. And as she was talking about convergences, the implications for me abound. There's many, but I will talk about two given the time limit. We have the piece around capacity building, not only within our own marginalized groups or within our own racialized groups, but also across difference, within our groups and then across differences. And so some of the work that I'm committed to and working alongside with academics like Dr. Ann is looking at how do we build Black and Brown solidarities. These are communities, there's multiple colonialisms, and as part of colonialism, the way in which it was operated and instituted is that they had put these false separations between Black and Brown communities. So as we are trying to capacity build, we are having these honest conversations, these dialogues, and talking about, well, how can we move forward? Because we can only break down, or I think a key tool to breaking down or dismantling white supremacy is if we come together in solidarity, and not just Black and Brown, but all of the BIPOC community, all of the global South, as Dr. Ann so clearly articulates throughout her book, that the global South is a force to be reckoned with, but we need to commit to those pieces. Now, the other piece I wrote down was around this, using the language that we so commonly hear around we need to do data-driven decision-making and accountability. Well, a tool that I use is I take that language and I say, great, let me make it data-driven for you. Let me connect the accountability piece for you, and let us serve the students, and let us serve the communities that we need to serve. Because I think connecting those dots in a real way doesn't necessarily happen. We don't have a handbook. We're not trained on this. And as you have said, Dr. Abdulaziz, the teachers that teach us have gone through the exact same program. And so they will teach us what they've been taught. And so the vicious cycle continues. And it takes me getting to graduate school, do my master's and PhD before I start to even think about decolonizing my mind, because it's nowhere to be found within the school system or around me. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Great. Dr. Khalid?
I can briefly, I can take you to page 58 in the book. and the way that Anne trying to put a scheme of restoring capacity while decolonizing educational leadership, and the sets and the stages and the steps are both very, I mean, give the space for intellectual exercise of self-reflexibility, then critical theorizing, and then moving toward, as I've said before, moving towards a grounded community, bold, while always engaged in critical dialogue, a collective a critical dialogue, disturb this colonized reality, while try to sustain a new, and she called this a new journey, and it makes us reflect on starting with her mama, going throughout the whole stages of her development and agency as educator, and then putting, reconnecting, coming back to this model, and then while its last stage is moving into a new journey of decolonizing, a new journey of anti-racism, a new journey that gives space to diversity, and a new journey that makes of this mosaic a beautiful entity and a beautiful space for all. So
thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you so much. Well, I will end with something, because talking about the implications, I mean, I will end this session. We are going to move to the Q&A session. One of the things that I have unlearned, and I am, on the process maybe of relearning and reframing a number of things after reading such a book. And thank you, Dr. Anne, for writing this book. Is that what Professor Anne says about leadership, the need of leadership, what type of leadership is needed, when she said, we do not need charismatic leaders to change the status quo. And she says that the people who are going to change the status quo are not lone rangers who depend on charisma and individual genius to transform schools. Rather, they are collaborative learners and teachers who advocate for democratic principles. And here she's quoting Ariaza and Krovitz. And so that's one of the things that I have learned, because whenever we talk about change and changing the status quo, most of us would say, yes, we need a leader to do this. We need someone who is charismatic, who is going to impose a number of issues and processes so that we change the status quo. Rania?
Yeah, thank you very much. And the session that we're having at the moment is just a great example, because each one of you, professors and doctors, so humble to share your work with us, to share this kind of critical dialogue and implications, ideas. I know that 1 hour and a half will not be enough for even one page. How about discussing, a book with amazing scholars like you? So we have a question, Dr. Anne, from Eray Kara. Excuse me if I'm not expressing this or saying this correctly, but what could we do as teachers or lecturers in our classes?
So I always love when folks ask questions about, so how do we make this into practice? What could we do in our classes? Because, that's where the rubber hits the road. It's exactly who is going to take up this work and turn the theory into some kind of action to make the change. I work and do access, and I always say, we can talk all we want about access. Just tell me, how many people did you put in a chair at the university to get a degree? And I think number of things here. One, I think for that part of the framework where I talk about critical theorizing, and maybe this book is just about, maybe I kind of unintentionally wrote my own journey out in public. I think it's really that idea of thinking about what exactly is my practice about, and what drives that practice. And that's really thinking about that. And then when it comes to teachers in their classrooms, it's really beginning to say, okay, let me reflect on how I'm engaging with my students. How am I engaging with the community? What practices am I using that maybe I experienced when I was a student, and I'm bringing it through to my students. For example, let me give a current day example during the pandemic. Um, we had this massive debate. I do not know about other places about students learning online and turning off a camera. We would not know how much debate there was around that one bit of thing, as to the idea that what are these children doing? Oh, there are homes where they have no control. If you stop and breathe and think about, that's really that whole coloniality of power, the desire to constantly want to control, imagining what learning is about and what it should be. And so in your classes, I would say, have a good understanding. And I think reason I wrote this book, which I think is missing from the discourse, is ways in which coloniality through knowledge and power perpetuates in education, whether it's assessment, how are we assessing? How are we lovingly redirecting students? What does that mean? And also, what aspects of this colonial imperial, some folks now are talking about racial capitalism and so on, are we bringing into the way that we're engaging with students at the K-12 level and at universities? And I just quickly want to say something, and Dr. Mungai, one of the things that struck me when I went to talking about coloniality, when I got off the aircraft and landed in Kenya, and I couldn't understand why everybody was called George and Paul and Mary. And I kept on saying, what is your name? And folks had looked at me confused, because that thing has rested with me for so long, as the denaming, the taking away. So teachers, when you have students in classes that have names that their ancestral names, do not dename them and de-identify them. Embrace and embed. And so those are some of the ways that teachers can begin to think through. And the last thing I would say about that is, I am going to tell you right now, so many people have no concept of anything that happened on the continent of Africa prior to enslavement. They have no idea, of what happened in Egypt. They have no idea of the contributions. So again, that's part of the decolonizing, decolonial process, the knowledge that is embedded in the space. So there's a lot that teachers can do. And I just quickly want to say, this is, and I'm looking at Arrow, because I think the last session, Arrow says, we're always talking about convergences, but maybe we need to talk about divergences. And I'm waiting to hear what Arrow has to say. But I think find ways in which, ask the question, what is being perpetuated in terms of coloniality and colonial practices and so on, in knowledge and power in the classroom and in engagement, in the many ways that we engage with students.
Thank you much for your answer, Dr. Anne. And allow me just also to elaborate something that you had mentioned within the book, is about critical thinking. As we teach it for the students, we also need to walk the talk and make sure that we're expressing that ourselves. The second thing, and it's really inspiring about storytelling, it does not stop within classrooms. It goes beyond that. So teachers don't only think, what am I supposed to do, or someone to tell you. I'm sure that everyone is going to have innovative solutions, but it's just going beyond what's expected and having this kind of super practitioner. Dr. Ira had mentioned something really interesting, and I'm keen to hear your input about it, about researchers and their role within thinking differently, especially about methods and procedures. Dr. Anne?
Oh, I thought you said Dr. Ira. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought I was
Dr. Ira was raising the importance of this point.
Yes. Okay. No. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question, because that is a conversation that is ongoing in terms of the kind of knowledge that is valued. And I think Dr. Mungai raises it around in some spaces where when students are doing their research, what exactly is the methodology and what is valued as methodology? So my question is, a decolonizing process means that us as university professors cannot continue to say we're critical, we're anti this and anti that, but in our basket is the basket of coloniality. So we're saying, oh, we're doing this, but when it comes to doing the research, we are not creating space for that, for drawing on indigenous knowledge, for positing new ways of thinking, for unearthing new knowledge, new data, new stories, and how is that taken up? So we have to continue the work of people like Patty Lather and others who say, what validity? Who is it valid for? Who decide? Who in the green people's creation is going to tell me or anyone that their story is invalid and invalidates it as data? That's what I fight for every day in my role as a university professor. And secondly, so there's so many things I think we need to unpack. So we when students are doing research and they collect their data, and then somebody from the West comes and says, so how are you going to scale this? Scale it to where? To whom? For what? We need to ask those questions. If not, all of us will become agents of the perpetuation of a particular kind of way of knowing and a particular kind of knowledge. We have got to clear the way, create the space for new ways of doing research, what we value as research, who can do research, and how that is counted. And we've got to, I'd hate to use the word fight, Professor, but we've got to fight for that space, because we are leaving a lot of academics, a lot of good people who should be in academia behind.
And he would leave us with the comment. I'm urging him, if he would like to open the mic and speak with us about research methods, are they also colonialized? So that's something for us all to think about.
Please do, Rania. We would like to hear a comment from Professor Ira Bogle, who is here with us. So if he would just unmute himself, Professor Ira.
I mean, it always strikes me when we're having intellectual conversations that we will go from the intellectual concept to the action stage or advocacy and leave out the methods and procedures. That is, we're researchers first and foremost. And if we're going to make political change inside education and across society, it is going to be through methodology. And so we've got to liberate methodology from the 5 or 6 books that keep getting cited again and again. Please, everybody, throw away your methods books. Come up with a problem and then work with students and work with participants in communities and develop a method that solves the problem, if not solves the problem, addresses the problem. And stop using the same 5 books or the same statistical methods. It's killing education at the university, and all of us are complicit in this death spiral. And I really believe the next frontier has to be methodology. And I'm not a methodologist, so I don't know, but I think that's the problem that we need to address as a community of scholars.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Professor.
Allow me just to add one comment on that. And I would say we've seen, like in Kenya, Professor Ann Lopez mentoring us and mentoring us on the change of methodology, because it's hard to get the African scholars published. And when I first submitted my article where we are covering her with her, and it was an emotional moment that she said, this is good work, and it's work that you've submitted elsewhere. It's not being accepted because there are gatekeepers even within the journals to ensure that our indigenous knowledge is stifled. It does not get into, it's not that in Africa we don't have scholars, but as Professor Ira has mentioned, is that there is a certain way we are being colonized to think and write. But what about us? That's the same question and Professor Ann Lopez was asking. We don't know anything about Africa before. It's not being documented. We had our own methodology, and that change of methodology is praxis with regard to decolonization. So I'm sorry I broke protocols. I had just mentioned that it resonated well, and Professor Ann Lopez is doing great work in mentoring scholars from University of Embu together with Professor Wayne, and that's very great. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Professor E. Bogle, for that indulgence in terms of we need to decolonize the methodology in all our university in academia. Thank you so much.
Just one quick thing. Decolonizing means breaking the protocols. We speak
So
when
now
the spirit says, spirit says talk when we want to talk.
I'm a good student of that.
No, we enjoyed this lovely discussion. Unfortunately, we might not be able to have all the questions, but we encourage you all to continue this lovely discussion and to read Dr. Ann's book. I wanted Abdulaziz also to have one of the quotes from your book talking about this is the act of love that generates passion, activism, and it is then a call for action for all educators to take on as well. So it's not only about reading, it's about relearning, rereading, about reflecting on our own practices, not only reflecting, but also we need to reconsider what we have done previously and what kind of actions that we want to take into place, especially to sustain what we have started and to know more. As you had said, it's not only about citing, but also to encourage other scholars from our own nations, countries, connecting with people around the world. It had been amazing discussion. We know that it would never end, but you were just paving the way for future kind of dialogue regarding this amazing piece of art. Dr. Ann, thank you for sharing this with us. Thank you for your efforts. Abdulaziz, our lovely panelists, Professor Khalid, Professor Harbin, Professor Mengai. Abdulaziz.
Yes, thank you so much, Rania, for all what you have said. And it's been an interesting, very, very interesting discussion. As I said, that goes beyond the book, it goes beyond the space, and it goes beyond the time that we have. So it's not just limited to this 1 hour and a half session. It's not limited to what we have done today. I'm sure that this will generate conversation, and it will generate, at least it will generate some thinking, and at least it will generate some kind of challenges. Each one of us is going to challenge themselves, because I'll go back to what Professor Khalid said. He said it very, very lovely, I think, when he said that Professor Ann, that Ann Lopez is not hiding herself. And she's talking about things that not everyone will take the challenge of bringing them in on the table, especially if you are a well-known scholar in a Western country, and talking about decolonization, talking about challenging authorities, challenging power, and challenging coloniality in all its aspects and in all its shades. Thank you so much, all the participants. I'm really sorry we could not ask all your questions, but you can still engage with all the panelists and with Professor Ann Lopez on this issue. And as Professor Rania said, our next event will be a discussion of an interesting book. The title of the book is Latinas Leading Schools, always within the domain of leadership and related to the, the Global South. Thank you very much. Thanks all for coming. Thank you for joining us. As I said, we will be here to explore and share new ways of, and multiple ways, not just new, but multiple ways of knowing, learning, and being. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank
Goodbye.
you very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Thank you so much. Great to see you, Professor Bogach. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Mungai. Thank you, Professor Rania. Thanks to everyone, Professor Singh, and everyone online. Thank you so much.
And we should have a big thank you for Dr. Khalid for always encouraging us and connecting, having those lovely, networks and organizations. Thank you much, Professor Anne.
Yeah.
It's really
Thank
an
you.
interesting book, and it's really encouraging us to reread, and to even think about writing about the topics that you had already mentioned related to our own situations and context. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye,
Great
everyone.
to see you, Professor Khalid. Bye. Thank you.
Stay well. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Khalid, you are muted.
Have a lovely weekend.
حبيت أقول شكرا ويعطيكم
Thank
العافية.
you, Dr. Khalid.
وانتم عاملين هيك حراك رائع، يعني لازم في كل بلد يكون، في كل مكان، انه نعزز مكانة الكتاب ونعزز مكانة التثاقف مع الآخر. والكتاب حقيقة ممكن الإنسان يتطلع بالمفاهيم الكمية على الكتاب ويشوف كتاب مش طويل كثير ولكن الكتاب أكثر يشبه حتى مانيفستو، قصير حاد واضح. كان ممكن تقدر تعمله 200 صفحة، وكان ممكن تقدر تعمله 150 صفحة، بس مش هذا اللي هاي. فكثير كان يعني خدمة كبيرة للجماهير إنه هذا الكتاب تم عرضه حقيقة. يعني لحد الآن هذا النقاش الثاني، وهذا تقييم يعني مش ذاتي،